So if you're behind a darkened screen and I can see your face, that would be great. I'm going to start to welcome everybody. There's Kim and Stu and Sophie Alexia, welcome. And hello, Lewis and David. There's Deb, Corrine, and wonderful Keith. And Maria, Kristen, Carrie, and Jesse. There's Annette and Patrice. Welcome to all of you. We'll just give it a few more minutes for a few more to file in. Well, and there's Selena. Welcome on a Saturday, wherever you are in the world, wherever you are in the quantum field. And hi, Carrie. So thumbs up if you can hear me okay. Okay, good. So we were just speaking with Dr. Goswami before you got on. We had some technical difficulties on my end and also possibly an intermittent connection all the way in India. So we just want to ask for your patience if anything stagnates or gets completely disconnected. We will find our way back to unity consciousness as quickly as possible. Just a few more minutes. And I've always found it very interesting since we started lockdown, at least in New York City, the start time for a live class could always be delayed by 10 or 15 minutes as people made their way from the subway into the actual physical space. But is there any really excuse for being late when we're online? Somehow we managed. Somehow we manage. Okay, so good. A few more faces are joining us. Welcome everybody that's coming in. We're going to just give everybody a little bit more time here, and I'll have the pleasure of introducing you to Dr. Goswami, and we can get rolling. Some nice new faces. Welcome. There's Irina in Sri Lanka. Nice to see you. Irina, what time is it in Sri Lanka?
Same time as mine.
All right.
Yes, correct. Same time.
And there's your lovely husband. I get to finally meet him. Nice to see you.
That's good.
2 for 1.
All right. Okay, 25 of us is enough to get started. We're having some spillover on YouTube right now. So everybody welcome in the cyberspace of YouTube who's joining us too. I'm Dr. Miles Neale, and together with our director, Allison Graham, we welcome you to the 8th segment of the Atain Quantum View module of the Contemplative Studies program, which is a 2-year program that most people on this call have been participating in for now over a year and a half, integrating Tibetan Buddhism with neuroscience, psychotherapy, and even in one case, Joseph Campbell. So we've made our way. People have been very earnest and have made their way through lockdown and economic crises and civil unrest, and of course the necessary social activism that's belying and occurring right now on the planet. And so for us, we've been in cyberspace really trying our best to make sense of reality. And in the present module, we've been really looking at emptiness, the point of view of the ultimate nature of things from the Buddhist point of view. And we had invited Geshe Tenzin Zopa to give us the Heart Sutra, which was then followed by a series of professors of Tibetan Buddhist studies to give us the philosophical entry points into ultimate reality. And we had Bob Thurman with us really talking about non-duality on the following the commentary of J. Tsongkhapa from the 14th century. So we've actually had quite a, in retrospect, I feel very successful series of lectures really revealing the ultimate nature of things. And now with Dr. Goswami's help, we'll really have an opportunity to make the bridge from ancient wisdom to quantum theory. So by way of introduction, Dr. Amit Goswami is a retired professor of physics from the University of Oregon, where he served from 1968 to 1997. He is the author of numerous books, notably The Self-Aware Universe, The Quantum Doctor, Quantum Creativity, and Quantum Spirituality. Dr. Goswami was featured in the movie What the Bleep Do We Know, which for me was probably the first time I was introduced to his work, and that's already in 2004. So I'm not sure how many of you are of that ilk where you remember that documentary, but it was fascinating, and it probably still exists on Netflix and it is timeless in a way and worth your revisiting. He was also featured in the documentaries The Dalai Lama's Renaissance and Quantum Activist, which was from 2009. And in 1999, he started a movement called Quantum Activism. And most recently, he and his collaborators have established the Quantum Activism Vishwalayam, which is a institution of transformation and education in India based on quantum science and the primacy of consciousness. And so those of you that like to check out Dr. Amit Goswami's work, his readings, his activities, his inspiration, you could visit him online at amitgoswami.org. And I'm very, very delighted that he could take the time to join us and serve as a land bridge between ancient philosophies and modern science. So without further ado, Dr. Goswami, thank you so much.
You're very welcome, Miles. It's a pleasure to be here. And hello, everyone. Good morning. I am really delighted to be speaking with you. I have been a teacher all my life, and I love interacting with eager young initiates who are trying to get into very complex subjects. And it is indeed. Emptiness is not easy. I was probably initiated, or my father tried to initiate me when I was very, very young. I remember I was like 4, and he would sit me on his lap and he would talk about Brahman, and that's a Sanskrit word for consciousness. And I did not understand a thing. However, I did like his energy. Often I would be quite active and busy and busy kind of energy, and I would come in his proximity and would come down. That was something very beautiful. So I was, I guess, a bit curious. And then something happened in 1973. By that time, I had become a materialist. I mean, you have to understand the pressure. I came to America after my PhD. That was 1963. And that was the heyday of America changing. It was impossible not to be moved by it. So I was very moved by it. But the part of the change was towards a sort of emancipation. That was the drug culture, hippie culture. That was also the spiritual Maharishi was there and so forth. I knew all that. But the culture that was also there was the permissive society, birth control, science, and materialism. Especially my hero was Richard Feynman, a great, great, great American scientist. And he wrote a book called Feynman Lectures in Physics, in which he really quite convincingly argued that there is no reason to assume anything but matter. Matter moving in space-time explains everything. And then right then, structure of DNA was known. That was in the 50s too. The combination was deadly, and computers were coming in. So this combination, computer science plus huge success for the kind of technology that physics is allowed to build, quantum physics, and plus the success of molecular biology, it's just very, very compelling case for everything is matter philosophy. So I became a complete believer of that. And indeed, I remember participating in debates about existence of God with students, and I would usually ridicule their position one by one and find great pleasure in terms of, oh, another conquest of naive people who believe in God. Now, of course, those beliefs in God were kind of naive and they were very easy to refute. But the philosophical arguments I didn't even understand. Deep philosophy, like people who talk to me about Zen, I could not even understand it. And when you don't understand something, there's a strong defensive tendency of refusing it entirely, which I did very successfully. Physicists learn that kind of sophistry. We are good at it. But please, tonight I'm not going to be very much articulate in terms of sophistry. I'll try my best to explain how quantum physics invites consciousness and in fact compels a worldview shift, compels a paradigm shift, compels a metaphysics shift. And you should feel this in your bones, you should feel this in your heart, that there is just no other way, that this great science, which is giving us all the technology today that we use is quantum technology. There is just no way to refute that quantum physics is the final physics. And then that physics, in order to make contact with manifest world, has to have consciousness. It is a compulsory argument. I will go through with it. And after you hear it, it is so much easier to accept non-dualism, non-dual consciousness, non-local consciousness. I'll be giving a lot of names to it. And of course, there is also emptiness. That's something we won't talk about tonight. We won't talk about it because by definition, it cannot be talked about. And I think we should all agree not to talk about it much. We can, towards the end, if time permit, I might engage with the question of why people do that, why people go to that level like Buddha did and some other even recent people did, why they did that and what it entails. We could go into those questions. And amazingly, quantum physics allows us to understand it, but no description of it is possible. So where we start is called qualified non-dualism. Non-dualism because there is no duality, consciousness is one and only, and qualified because it's subject to the quantum science. That's the qualification. So all previous qualifications that spiritual traditions have given us, that all can be summarized as a law of quantum science, okay? That's the position that we will be getting at. But let me begin with basic quantum physics, why it is called quantum physics, and that confuses a lot of people also because quantum fundamentally means a little particle, as Miles already mentioned. Part of materialism is reductionism. Objects can be reduced to their essence, which is actually very small. So if you divide matter, if you divide energy, you get the smallest quantity and you cannot divide any further. So the quantum of energy is the smallest elementary particle of energy. Quantum of matter is called elementary particle. The understanding is elementary particle would be a particle, and the understanding initially was that quantum also means that energy is made of also particles. And then no other than Einstein pointed out, but look, light is energy and light is known to be a wave. Why is that so surprising? Because waves can be in many places at the same time. Just look at the water wave, you can create it yourself by throwing a pebble in a pond, and immediately water wave starts getting bigger and bigger, right? And so the wave can be in so many places at the same time. Whereas the particle, if you throw it, will always describe a trajectory one place at a time. So the wave movement and particle movement are completely different, right? How can the object, like light, be both? And then scientists discovered that yes, matter also behaves like waves. And then finally in 1925-26, the equation for quantum physics was discovered. And that really is a fantastic revealer, because what it showed is that there is no ambiguity. Quantum objects are actually waves, not particles. Quantum objects are waves. However, the confusion is created because whenever we measure them, these waves become particles. Initially, the people who were doing it, they're all great physicists, Nobel laureates, and their respectability is so high that for a long time, people were very scared to challenge them, but they were prejudiced. And out of their prejudice, they tried to create tremendous rationalizations. These rationalizations are quite famous, but I won't go into that because our time is limited, and your patience will also be limited because things get a little more complicated as we go on. So let's not go into too much of a history, but let's just say that we scientists also have our prejudices, right? And these prejudices are not necessarily bad, because what happens is that you have a lot of prejudice, and then when you realize that your prejudice is wrong, it's like making a abrupt transition in your consciousness. Creative people all do that, and it is called the aha experience. And that's a very great experience to have, because you had one belief and you get all of a sudden another belief. Einstein had to go through that when he discovered time is relative. The belief was very strong, time is absolute. Darwin, his belief was that God creates the world, and he had to go through this and recognize that no, it cannot be that way, because fossil records definitely exist. God did not create the world all at the same time. And so every big discoveries come like that. But still, people try to rationalize for quite a while. So the rationalization in this case went from like 1925 to the 50s, and questions were raised. So I'll mention two questions. They gave us the hint, and then how it came to me to solve it. So I'll go through the next 10 minutes, we pay utmost attention. This is the crucial part of the whole presentation. This you've got to understand. If you have any questions, write it down, and then when it comes question answer time, please clarify, because this is the part which is the meat of the whole quantum science. So waves. How can objects be waves and still, when we measure them, be particles? So look at a situation where we are measuring these objects. We can do double slit experiment. You may have heard of it. If water waves go through two slits, then they become two waves, and the two waves interfere. And this interference produces a pattern. Pattern is like some places waves will be strong, other places waves will tend to cancel each other out. So there'll be no waving. So you see this water coming in with very pronounced waving, and then very pronounced waving, very pronounced waving. In between, water is flat, no waving at all. Very interesting phenomenon. So does electron do that? We knew that light does that. But the electrons, these are really elementary particles. That was the belief, right? Do electrons do that? You pass an electron, and does it become two waves, and waves interfere, and then some place the wave is very strong and other places not strong at all, right? Do we get that kind of pattern? electron dividing itself up in all these different fringes. Yeah, we get that pattern. It's an amazing thing. Of course, here's the thing. Initially, they did the experiment with a whole bunch of electrons, right? And then you look at the total result, and then you see that, well, okay, electrons are arriving here, arriving here, arriving here, arriving here, but nowhere in between. So it's alternative bright and dark fringes of electrons, very much like alternative waving and no waving for water waves. So we had to declare that this electron is wave, but this is not a particle experiment. So you see how people can rationalize? They immediately rationalize, oh, this is a wave experiment. And then when you measure an electron with a Geiger counter, those things that go tick, tick, tick when you put it in front of a radioactive substance, which emit electrons, they are discretely sounding tick, tick, tick. So the electron is exactly at that Geiger counter, not here, not there, just here, right? So that was called the particle measuring apparatus. So the idea was that if we measure with a wave measuring apparatus, then we get the wave nature. And if we measure with a particle measuring apparatus, we get the particle nature. See, that's the rationalization. Is that what happened? Somebody had the enormous fortune, actually a graduate student who had a girlfriend, and he put the experiment on with a very slow beam of electrons. Electrons come one by one and go through the apparatus and whatever. But his girlfriend called, and young man, so he went off and he forgot about his experiment. 2 days later, he comes back and he finds that though electrons went one by one through the slit, even then there was the same pattern. How did that happen? Did one electron make all these little divisions? No, then he did carefully, and yes, if one electron goes to the two slits, it arrives at one point only. But that point is not necessarily in the place you expect it. It's not behind the slit, where you would expect if you threw baseballs on a double slit. Get the picture? It's arriving on one of the fringes, bright fringes, but it's not right behind the slit where it's expected to be if it is a Newtonian particle. So everything now, what? Because the same experiment is showing that the object is a particle and also the object is a wave, what is going on? Finally, people realized that must be going on is that the waves reside in a different domain of reality. They're not waves in space and time, they're waves in a domain outside of space and time. But this interpretation came many years later. People still somehow try to wiggle their way, and all that is history. I won't go into that. But this domain of potentiality, look, this is already throwing out scientific materialism. The idea that matter moving in space and time is the only reality. But still, there was hope. The hope is called instrumentalism. I don't know if you know that. There's a long history when Galileo arose his ideas. Of course, the Pope in Rome was not particularly favorite of Galileo's results. So he said, okay, but look, science is instrumental. It may be useful for finding out about some things. That's okay, but as far as reality is concerned, science may not be at all applicable. This position is called instrumentalism, okay? So some people took the instrumentalist view, but of course, that's not the way newspapers sell things. They are sure that everything is made of matter and values go away from society, and all this you know already. Even truth, which is the basis of science, is now gone. So this has been a problem. But plot became only thicker and thicker and thicker, because 1925, the equation was discovered. In 1935, Einstein, Podolsky, and Rosen, three very well-known physicists. Well, Einstein was the well-known one at that time. The other two became famous later. But these three people showed something fantastic. Boggles one's mind if you have prejudices. What they did was to show that if two objects, these waves of possibility, now that they're, we'll use that language, although that language was discovered many years later, but still, let's not quibble about history. So two waves of possibility, if they interact, showed Einstein, Podolsky, and Rosen, they acquire a very unexpected characteristic. They can interact locally, and then whatever that distance is, they can move apart, they can go miles apart, they can go galaxies apart, but still they will be able to communicate instantly. This instant communication is not allowed in physics, thanks to relativity theory. It's not allowed in physics if you take the materialist philosophy, that only space and time is the reality. If you say reality is space and time, in space and time, any two objects have to interact with the help of a signal, and signals have a finite speed, less than or equal to the speed of light. And that is a finite speed. Instant communication means infinite. If there was a signal, it would be infinite speed. That's not allowed in physics. Therefore, what Einstein, Podolsky, Rosen showed is that either quantum physics is in direct conflict with relativity theory, if we believe that there is only one domain of reality, space and time, or there has to be another domain. Now there's no question. If this is the case, then there has to be another domain of reality outside of space and time in which instant communication is possible between two objects. It's a possibility. If they interact, then it becomes the case. These two objects are called correlated or entangled. Once they're correlated, they can move away as far as they can, and still they would be able to have instant communication. What does that mean? You know, for many years, people didn't think of it. And then one day I came over the idea, just came suddenly that, yeah, that means oneness, doesn't it? If you are communicating with yourself, you don't need signals. Infinite speed of signals does not exist. So we have to give up the idea that communication can only take place with signals. It's a signal-less communication, right? And signal-less communication implies, I realized, a oneness. Okay? So that was a very interesting finding, because that gives you the final answer. But what does the oneness mean? That still has to be figured out, because some people who are also similarly realized that there is oneness, for example, Irving Laszlo, but he suggests that, okay, there is a field of oneness. He calls it quantum field. And that phrase has become quite popular because he's quite well known. And that gives you the impression that this quantum field or oneness, it's really a potential oneness, because only when objects interact, they become one. Otherwise, they are quite separate. What is it? Is it a field? Is it an object? Or is it more? So there is still this question. So this is where the third development has to be brought in. That happened in the 50s. John von Neumann, this is another great scientist, who was a great mathematician. And mathematics sometimes can derive things which are a little obscure initially. When the mathematics is done, then it becomes very clear. Oh, it has to be that way. So what von Neumann showed is that if you keep to quantum physics, laws of quantum physics, you reach a very, 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 very interesting conclusion. You reach the conclusion that staying within the laws of quantum physics, material interactions cannot change waves of possibility into particles of actuality. Cannot be done. Cannot be done with material interaction. Think about it. So there has to be something non-physical that's changing the waves into particles. A process that physicists call collapse of the wave. Okay, you can think of collapse all the time, but this ain't what is happening, right? Because material interactions cannot do it. Something that is doing it is nothing like waves collapsing, you know, like a collapsible umbrella collapsing into a, nothing like that is happening. It's not happening in space and time. It is not happening in any way that we can imagine it. It's happening, of course, because we see particles. The experiment is true. Double slit experiment is not wrong. But how it is happening? So von Neumann asked this question: what is involved in an experiment like double slit experiment, where a non-physical object at least is possible? And he could see nothing except the human observer. Human observer, it makes some sense that there is this religions and there is this spiritual traditions and there is this experience that we also have, that we have a self, and that may not be material. I mean, of course, you understand, von Neumann himself is a very prejudiced man too. Everybody believes in scientific materialism. And still, he is a mathematician. Mathematics has shown that it cannot be material interaction. So he said, got to be consciousness, got to be the observer. So he said, observer chooses. Observer's consciousness chooses. Because waves can be thought of as a many-faceted object, and electron can be in many positions all in the same time in possibility, is the same thing as saying that electron has many facets to choose from. Electrons cannot choose, but human being can choose. Electrons cannot choose because it's a material interaction, so electron cannot choose. But a human observer, since human observer has self, which could be non-material, right? So consciousness chooses, the observer consciousness chooses among the various positions, the exact position where the electron will manifest. That's von Neumann's idea. Got it? So now when I got into the picture, which was after 1973, and that was because Fred Alan Wolf, a very flamboyant physicist, quantum physicist, he introduced a phrase which became very popular in New Age circles. I don't know if you know about the New Age movement. That was a very, very quite poignant movement in the 60s and 70s. And the phrase was, we create our own reality. We create our own reality. That's a very catchy thing. It's still quite catchy. Lots of people will see movies like, which makes a big point of it. There's a movie called The Secret. The secret of manifestation is that you desire, you intend. Fred started all this. Fred is a good friend of mine, and I like him. He had a big role in the What to Believe, Do We Know. But of course, you know, it's not that easy. You try to choose. I went to a workshop, I remember, and the workshop leader said, well, you probably are thinking that you would choose to manifest a car, but don't, because that takes too many sessions of intending. Why don't you try to choose a parking space for your car in downtown? And that's hard enough. For 5 days, I drove my car to the downtown Portland, and I could never find a parking place. Although I dutifully meditated for half an hour, I intend to have a parking space for my car. But at the end, I had to give in and park it in a parking garage. So that was the idea. Okay, but then time goes on. I'm still very intrigued. And I realized that the answer must be in consciousness. We are not getting what consciousness is. because we are assuming the observer consciousness. When we are saying observer consciousness, most of us think of it's a brain phenomenon. I mean, I know you are the exception because you are having this discourse on emptiness. The whole idea of consciousness is, it is not brain phenomenon. But ordinarily, that's how people think, and materialists certainly think that way. So for me, it was a very huge paradox. It cannot be a brain phenomenon because von Neumann that's clearly ruled it out. It cannot be a material interaction that cannot explain the transition from wave to particle. Can it be dualistic consciousness? That was von Neumann's picture. Consciousness separate from matter. But again, since Cartesian times, 1600s, it has already been very clear that dualism is not tenable. You remember that conversation Descartes had with Princess of Bohemia. It just cannot be done. And many people have tried to wiggle out of that, but never really successful in terms of how does non-material interact with material. This fundamental objection against dualism just could not be answered in a scientific way, scientifically accepted way. Of course, it could be anyway. That's instrumentalism again. Science is just instrument, and the world is much bigger, like Hamlet says to Horatio. There is more things than heaven and earth. All right, we can always believe that. So here we are. How does it work? So I started hobnobbing with consciousness people, Zen masters and the like. Zen is very favorite of mine because I hobnobbed a lot trying to find the answer from Zen because it's very much like quantum physics, some of it. But directly, no, because they would say things that just I could not comprehend. They would say some things I could comprehend, like enlightenment is like a quantum leap. That was very neat because quantum leaps are well known in quantum physics. When electrons jump from one orbit to another, it does not go through the intervening space and goes at once. And that's what Zen masters are saying. Enlightenment happens at once, not going through a whole bunch of thought process. So that was very attractive. So I kept going, but no answers. But then I met mystics who are unmistakably had that energy that my father had, that coming down energy, that happy energy. You in their proximity, you feel happy. So I felt that, well, these guys are saying they're enlightened and they really have something. This cannot be denied. And of course, their picture, all these pictures of non-dual consciousness and kind that I could not understand, could not comprehend, and just would not permit in my worldview. Not possible. And then I was talking to one of these guys one evening, and this fundamental change. I mean, I've been hearing about this quantum leaps and stuff. And of course, by that time, I read Darwin's story and many other stories of quantum leaps that people take. And it happened to me. All of a sudden, this guy shouted at me, saying the Sufi saying, there is nothing but God. La ilaha illallah, that's the Arabic words. And I had an about turn in my consciousness. Instead of rejecting, which is my usual policy, and hiding behind sophistry, I started realizing that it's quite possible. I just realized if consciousness is the ground of being and matter is possibilities within consciousness, what's the problem? Matter chooses on its own, there is no dualism. I mean, consciousness chooses from its own, there is no dualism. Matter is possibility of consciousness itself to choose from. See how the dualism goes away. Oneness. Matter is one with consciousness. Consciousness is one because consciousness is the only one. There's nothing else. It's the ground of being. That's non-duality, right? So in quantum physics, the only difference is that it is a potential non-duality. It's a potentiality. It's a domain of potentiality. Consciousness is the domain of potentiality. The oneness is a potential oneness. So like, people get very confused. And some of you, I'm sure, are very, very confused. Why are we not enlightened by simply going to sleep? Because then there is no split of the world disappears, we are one. And sometimes people actually do say that we are one, yes. No, we are not one. Why? Because we are not connected yet. We are not non-locally connected. That non-local connection has to be found first, and then you go to sleep. Yes, that is called samadhi. But unless you do that, which takes a lot of meditation, this is why you guys have to work so much. I mean, why people like Miles teaches you and teaches you and teaches you and makes you meditate. This is why. Because unless you become connected first, that oneness is only potentiality. You sleep, you still hang on to your ego, separateness, okay? So this kind of thing becomes easy to understand once you get the idea that it is actually potential oneness. But the main thing, once you get that metaphysics, the main thing that science enables you to, because you still have to explain the observer effect, it's happening through the observer, right? And so what's the connection to the observer? And so you have to show that the observer is something very special. Observer's brain is something very special. It's not like a photographic film. It's not like a Geiger counter. Von Neumann already showed that no, these are just simply material interactions. They cannot do the collapsing. They cannot do the conversion of wave to particle. Observer can, because observer has something special. Where is that something special? It's in the brain, obviously, because brain is the perceptive apparatus and all that. But how does brain not? Material object indeed, I mean, it is, right? Brain has, it is made of matter. I mean, who can deny that, right? The molecules of brain are material molecules. So what is it in the brain that is making it behave like this, not a Geiger counter? How is consciousness making it possible to see through the brain and becoming divided into a self and the other? What is going on? And that required, but when I did that though, this is the beauty of the creative experience, that you are sure these things will be worked out. So it took me a while to work everything out, but it indeed works out that brain has a apparatus, the perception apparatus, of course, that we know. The light goes through the eyes, and then the brain does something to the image and eventually produces an electrical image. But then you have to make sense of it. So that requires cognition, that requires mind. And it's gets a little bit complicated here, and we don't really need that. What we need to realize that it is impossible to perceive without making a memory of it. So memory requires perception, because otherwise there's nothing to memorize. But perception also requires memory. This is the fundamental thing that I have to get through. And perception and memory make a circular thing. Okay? Make a circularity. There is no perception without memory. There is no memory without perception. And this kind of circularity in logic is called tangled hierarchy. A fellow named Doug Hofstadter, a computer scientist, he wrote a book with tangled hierarchies, explaining a lot of that. We won't go into the details because it takes too much time, but it is a wonderful concept, and that makes the brain special. This existence of this kind of tangled hierarchical perception and memory, that's that combination. Now, you have to go back a little bit to Buddhism, and this is where my knowledge of Buddhism paid off enormously. I knew this already. In Buddhism, remember, they were faced with two isms. The perception has always been a very bothersome thing for any philosophy. How do we perceive it all, right? So one theory was the materialist theory. Even then, the materialist theory says, well, okay, the srishti is a Sanskrit word meaning creation, matter first, and then you have drishti. Then we learn to see, and that's how the world is created. First matter comes, and then we develop the seeing apparatus, then the world manifests. So srishti before drishti. First the matter, and then the ability to see, awareness. And the other theory, of course, which is the Vedantic or spiritual kind of theory, that no, it is the drishti which makes matter. Consciousness experiences, consciousness is wanting to experience is what creates the world. This is roughly what the spiritual traditions try to say. It's play of that oneness, right? So, and then again, there's a debate which you cannot really answer. So in Buddhism, they had a wonderful insight, and this insight, of course, is called that famous Paticca Samuppada, dependent co-arising. It's a beautiful logical solution because it's saying that they arise together. Srishti and drishti arise together. Subject and object arise together. Okay. Notice, 2,000 years later, or 2,500, whatever, probably 2,000, because I think it came more from Nagarjuna than Buddha, right? Buddha was 2,500 years, 2,600 years ago. Okay, so somewhere, but millennia ago, this idea, dependent co-arising, quantum physics is discovering it through the concept of tangle hierarchy in the brain, dependent co-arising. So this is the mystery of consciousness, how non-dual becomes a duality, subject and object. And then, of course, how the subject, this universal subject, which we call inner self or quantum self or no self in Buddhism, which is the same thing, no individual self. And then we get an individuality because we collect this memory. So again, that memory apparatus is so vital because that will, first, forgetfulness is we become, forget the oneness, we become dual, subject-object split. And then second barrier to remembering that oneness is that we have become now conditioned and identified with an individual brain and body. All these memories are hugely captivating. The world, we create the world with our memories. And so after this much forgetfulness, it is indeed very hard. How we can put it is that, my favorite way of putting it, and here again, look at the meditative techniques that Buddhism has developed, how beautiful it is. What do we do in Buddhism? In Buddhism, the favorite meditation is mindfulness. Vipassana, mindfulness. We look at the thought pattern. And then after a while, the teacher will say, okay, enough of that. Now look at just a whole entire field of awareness. Not only look at your thoughts, but look at the thinker as well. The thinker and the thought. So field of awareness. Two poles, we are looking at both poles. So we are sort of witnessing. This is called witnessing meditation. So we are meditating on awareness itself. It's called witnessing or awareness meditation. And then the teacher will say, well, actually the important thing is to find the subject. So why don't we just say, concentrate on the witness? Can we do that? Can we just look at the witness itself, move one step back, witness itself? But if you think about it, then you can even go further back and look at the witness, witnessing ad infinitum. How far can you go? we'll do this meditation at the end. This is my favorite meditation to illustrate that you get something. You get something because what happens is that you relax. Out of all that frustration, how can I do this? Because you cannot really keep track. After 3-4 steps, you just cannot keep track. Mind get boggled and you get very frustrated. And out of all that frustrations, something happens. And that something has been a puzzle, a paradox of perception for a very long time. Can we keep this from going infinite number? Is there really something at the end? And of course there is. That is that no self. You fall into no self, right? And that is what gives us, makes it a relaxation meditation. So this is also eventually called mindfulness, awareness meditation, subject meditation, and then relaxation meditation. Because it's absolutely bound to produce relaxation. After all that frustration, you give up and then you fall into this end point, no me, no self. And that no me state is what we are coveting. That's the samadhi state. That's the beginning of samadhi. Then of course there is the other samadhi where you become one with the oneness. That's the Buddha samadhi, but Buddha samadhi is even deeper. That's called the nirvikalpa, complete emptiness. That's just totally void. You cannot talk about it, emptiness. Here we can talk about it. We can talk about emptiness. That's the qualified non-dualism. That's as far as we can go. Okay, now I did promise Miles that I will speak about some other things, and we do have some time, right? Do we have? Yeah, we have, right? We have plenty of time. We have half an hour. Okay, so let's talk about some applications. I hope this was not too quick. I hope you understood more or less, right? I hope so. It's just a whole bunch of things that was crammed into this exposition. Because you guys already know some things, should help a little. And I want to just point out that, look, this concept of signal-less communication has a special name, and this is very important, non-locality. So remember that non-locality is another name for oneness. And this name is very important because this has been verified experimentally. This is very important to recognize. So this qualified non-dualism is not just philosophy. Buddhism, Vedanta, these are not just philosophy. Taoism, these are not just philosophy. It's experimentally verified philosophy. Abner Shimoni, a physicist, has called this experimental metaphysics. So why do we say science and spirituality is integrated, or why do we say spirituality is now scientific? Because we know that non-locality exists. It is experimentally verified. We have verified that yes, two particles, once they are correlated, they indeed communicate at a distance without any signals, faster than the speed of light. So there is just no doubt. And now, in fact, you know, after my book came out, I got a call from a Mexican neurophysiologist. He was doing an experiment at the University of Mexico. He said, why don't you come? We'll do it together. So I went. I didn't do any experiment with him. I just sat there. You know, I'm a theoretical physicist, completely head person. I only think. But still, I did complete my laboratory, so I am not so scared of laboratory either. So I did watch, and I took an interest, and indeed they do everything kosher. Two subjects sat in separate chambers, and one subject is sitting in what is called a Faraday chamber. Electromagnetic wave cannot penetrate. So they're completely isolated, and they're meditating with the intention. Just like that, I create my own reality, that kind of intention. The intention is that I'll be correlated with this other guy who is outside, who is meditating also. And then the guy who is outside, who is meditating, is shown a series of light flashes. The guy who is inside the Faraday chamber, who is also meditating, is not shown anything. He's just meditating. with the intention that they be correlated. Okay? Guess what happens? This person's brain gets electrical activity, which can be summarized as a bunch of brain waves, special brain waves called event-related potential or evoked potential. Can be measured by EEG. With a computer program, you can eliminate the noise and then you get a signal called evoked potential. And then they had an EEG machine also connected to this other fellow who is sitting inside the Faraday chamber. And that EEG machine, he hasn't seen any light flashes, so his brain should be benign, right? And yet, the brain has shown waves very similar in phase and strength to the evoked potential. So there is no other way but to describe it as a transfer of electric potential, transferred potential. And then imagine, that was in 1992, August, and now it is 2020, and by now 24 different laboratories have replicated the same experiment. Same result, transferred potential, electric signal can travel from one brain to another without any electrical connection. Non-locality. Believe it. We can be one. So then it's a question of, okay, so how do we become one? So that's one direction we can go. This is why I, after so many years, finally decided that, all right, I have a little bit of meditative experience, a little bit of transformation, and nothing like this, these guys, enlightened guys, nothing like that. I own, I'm a scientist to the core and no pretension. But I know how to experience a samadhi, and I know that it does transform if you use the creative process. And so I decided that, okay, all right, let's have a University of Transformational Education. Can we teach this? The reason I was enthusiastic is that my feeling is that if we have the process, how to do it, process is creative process, and quantum science does explain it. Quantum physics is so powerful that it not only can make a theory of matter, but it also can make a theory, quantum theory of the mind, quantum theory of vital energies that we feel, quantum theory of the archetypes that we intuit. So these quantum things, these quantum experiences, internal experiences, that's where our creative transformation has to go. We don't transform matter. So fundamentally that we create our own reality went wrong because the emphasis was to manifest material things. No, that's not where we manifest, because material things are pretty Newtonian at the macro level. Matter has this problem, micro and macro. Mind does not. Mind is not micro macro. Mind is just one thing, one infinite ocean in which there can be waves of possibility, but that's it. You don't have this quantum, you don't have these particles. It's facets. Mind has many facets, many meaning. We choose, one meaning comes out. So this is why in Zen, what does a Zen master do? Holds up a pen and says, okay, what is it? And you say pen, and he will say, I'll hit you 30 times. What is he trying to say? Yes, you can hit one with a pen. It hurts a little bit, right? In fact, if you drop a pen from a height onto the ground, it'll fall. And by measuring the time it took to fall, you can calculate the barometric pressure at this height. So it can be a barometer. So the meaning is not a fixed meaning. This is the mystery of all these Zen koans. What was your name before you were born? Okay, so your name may not be Bob, your name may not be Miles, I may not be Amit, I may be something from 1,000 names, and then this particular name has been chosen for me, right? So when I manifest. So in this way, everything is possibility before it manifests. What is your name? What is the sound of one hand clapping? Possibility, quantum possibility, right? So in this way, it's possible then to follow these traditions and possible then to follow these traditions to manifest all the way, and then we can manifest transformation. If we really, 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 really intend that I will learn to love, which is a major problem, right? Loving kindness is something that you meditate on. That's a favorite subject of Buddhist meditation, loving kindness. I have meditated many, many hours on loving kindness. It's a wonderful meditation because your heart gets involved, and that too is also a phenomenon that quantum science can explain. Not only we have a self in the neocortex, but we also have a self in the heart. And because of that, that heart energy that people talk about is real, it's true. And the Tantric Buddhism, Tibetan Buddhism is also completely valid. Vajrayana, it does work. So all the paths of Buddhism, Hinayana is a little limited, but the practices are fine. Mahayana, of course, is the great path, no question. It is Mahayana, great path. Vajrayana is good because it uses the vital part in the transformational process. So what we do in the quantum science way, we use both the mind like Zen, but we also use the vital like Vajrayana. And this combination is very, very useful. In fact, I sometimes jokingly say that because spirituality has always been very male dominated, and males like this is a brain built thing. Brain works in such a way that our amygdala, where the emotions are, that's connected to our right brain more, whereas women's amygdala is connected more to the left brain. So they have to deal with emotions, but right brain is unconscious in us, so we don't have to. So men get away with suppressing a lot of emotions. And that's why the male, female are quite different. Women are emotional, men are not. And therefore, what happens is that men have always emphasized the mental part, never the energy feeling part. And that has created a lot more problem, I think. I think it's much easier if we do it together. Although I did not do it this way. I am a male, and no question that I was very dried up. And it was my wife who constantly challenged me, you don't love like from the heart. And I would say, what is heart? There is no heart. It's all brain. Grow up. And she would say, you grow up. And then I grew up finally and allowed the heart. And indeed, heart exists. And we have a science of the heart now. And it's really quite beautiful this way. It's quite beautiful this way because you can connect to somebody so much easier. See, I'm already connected with you. And this is something that you cannot do it with the brain. You have to be creative together in order to be connected. It's hard. Or intend together meditate for half an hour, like the Stanford potential experiment showed. If they meditated any less, no, nothing doing, okay? So really, either you take the heart path, meditation, like these guys whose brain really changes. I hope, Miles, they have told all these guys to read a book called Altered Traits. This is a book by Goldman and Davidson. This will fantastically affect your consciousness if you still are a non-believer. They have shown that indeed this non-locality of the brain is no kidding. Brain is usually local. When we are in the ego, only a little part of the brain becomes involved. That part is in the prefrontal cortex, just as the materialist would expect. That's the decision making, and ego has that. That's a local thing. But then these meditators, they have meditated like 30, 40 years, and every day, like hours. And then these guys, after meditating so many years on loving kindness, their brain is changed. They're full of non-locality, and for which there is a signature. Signature is gamma waves. Their brain waves do not go to beta like ordinary people's. No, not much beta. It's all gamma, full of gamma. Gamma is higher than 40 hertz. That's not easy. I mean, that's like mathematician, physicist, rocket engineer. This is the kind of concentration it demands before it gets to 40 hertz, right? Ordinary people's concentration, beta. When you relax, alpha. When you're more relaxed, sleep, delta. So, you know, these things are so well known now. Brainwave shows that a lot. There is this data, of course, require fMRI, functional magnetic resonance imaging. That's where the data came from. But these data are very good because, you know, like experimental metaphysics, Aspe's experiment that showed non-locality. These are definite ways to show that really we are talking about something that is alive, talking about something that is real. It can be seen directly. I mean, two people communicating at a distance with electromagnetic communication could not happen because one is sitting in a Faraday cage. I mean, these things are real. So this is what intrusion of science does. Science has made it like it's, you know, like William Blake. You can hold the infinity in the palm of your hand. Now you really can because, you know, science has made it possible. It is real, like experimentally verified, easily. So, you know, this is the part where I think you really can take heart that it's no longer a whole bunch of belief systems or even a whole bunch of experiences. Yes, experiences are also very compelling. I mean, no question. Your ability to love, transformation, those things are very compelling as well because indeed, it is so hard. We know so hard to Krishna's, right? And still one can. It is possible, and these people whose brain trade goes away, indeed they have. And so many others. And it's not even hard, even I a little bit. So, you know, in this way, get the idea that if this is the case, then what can we do about the world? This is why I have this movement called Quantum Activism. If people could understand non-locality, if people could understand that, look, truth is one and only, so is consciousness, one and only. Just as the scriptures say in all religions, Jesus, Buddha, they have Krishna, they all have the same message. My Father and I are one. Kingdom of God is everywhere, right? That's Jesus. Vedanta, Sarvang Khalidang Brahman. Buddhism, it's all non-dual, that oneness, emptiness. That's where the reality is really about. That's where it all comes from. Paticca Samuppada, dependent co-arising. That's how the world and conscious subject arise together. That's how it is. The world only exists in the experience of the conscious person, in our experiences. Outside of that, there is no material world sitting there. This is just vintage quantum physics. So quantum physics has changed our worldview. It's just that we are refusing to do it that way. We don't have to be little Donald Trumps. We don't have to be. But we become like that. All of us have become like that. We have become very, very limited. We are limited by the belief system, by the selfishness, by all this. So how to go beyond it is to recognize that all our social sciences, and it begins with psychology, they're based on the wrong assumption right now. And we have to change that because the changes are all based on data. The ideas of the change is no longer just theory or just somebody's experience. It's not a teacher who is Dalai Lama telling you and therefore you have to believe him. No. Of course, Dalai Lama doesn't talk like that either. He says, oh, you check it out, you meditate and you'll find. But you cannot get the scientists to meditate. That's one of the big problems. I have tried and tried and tried. They don't like meditating. They can't. That their mind is so intellectual, they just cannot see the expansion of consciousness. If they could, I tell you, you know, when scientists retire, then they can meditate. and they change. I have many retired scientist friends who have become quite spiritual. Because once you see that, yes, you meditate and your consciousness can expand, and for a moment, you can really have that oneness with another person, then you don't have any problem. This whole idea of just if people could understand that consciousness can be expanded. It's not something static. It's not something that is confined in this brain and nothing else. Me, me, me. It's really like I can love Miles and I can love you and I'm one with you. It's really like that. It can expand. If this could be conveyed to the world. So this is what we do with quantum activism. We have to bring the message of quantum physics because it's not a static message. It's not an intellectual message. It's a message that we can live. We have to learn to live this way, you know, and then the world can change. Because all of these sciences, once they're reformulated, like take a look at democracy. Why do we value democracy so much? And why are we so proud to be an American? You know, I am only a naturalized American, okay? So I'm not even a natural American, naturalized American, but still I am very proud to be American. Why? Because the Constitution starts saying all men, okay, forget that Prabhupada, but that was, you know, a long time ago. All men are created equal. So all people are created equal. This idea could not have come without a great amount of spirituality. You know. Thomas Jefferson was a spiritual man, in spite of the fact, you know, today we try to topple his statue and we think we are doing a wonderful thing. No, we are not. Because social customs and a person's consciousness are completely two different things. My mother, who is a very spiritual woman, would not drink water from a Muslim's hands because that's a social custom. But on the other hand, if a Muslim came as a beggar, which many times they did, because I went through a famine when I was a young child, many a time, most times, she would give away her food because a beggar came and she didn't care if it's a Muslim. She did not care. She would cry and she would give the food away. That is a spiritual person. Spiritual person, spirituality is in the ability to be one with the other, not about how one behaves with someone because of social custom. Okay, but that's just a little side thing. Democracy. Why do we value democracy? Why are we so worried about somebody becoming a dictator? The reason, of course, is that democracy has this ideal. All people are created equal, which is a spiritual statement. All people are created equal because they come from the same source. They're all one ultimately, and one can even realize this. So what's the definition, scientific quantum definition of democracy? Quantum definition of democracy is that if you're an American, you should be able to correlate with every other American. Whatever, sex, creed, color should not matter. I should be able to love anyone American. Okay, it's not just American. Of course, they can expand it to planet, but start with something, okay? If we could love every other American, then that would be a great achievement already. And then from that to planet Earth is not very hard. Once you have done it, even with your family, you have done great. And this is the way to transform. This is what quantum physics is saying. And democracy is a step towards it. Capitalism is a step towards it. Liberal education is a step towards that. We have forgotten these messages. The fundamental message is mystical and very quantum, spiritual and very quantum. And it is fact. Now there is no doubt because the experimental data tells you that, yes, we are one. We have expanded consciousness. Indeed, we can easily manifest expanded consciousness. It's not hard. It's not hard to do. Okay? So in this way, be inspired and try to change the social system. In India, there is a treatise This is also a very great treatise, just as Diamond Sutra or Abhutamsaka Sutra. Bhagavad Gita is also a great spiritual treatise. And in that, there is a way that they prescribe called Karma Yoga. This Karma Yoga, a beautiful concept, yoga of social action. You act in the society, but through the action itself, you can become transformed. This is very similar to the concept of Kungian vow in Buddhism. I will not take the final liberation. I will not go the path of emptiness, but I'll stay one step short. I'll stop with qualified non-dualism and I'll stay here forever. And so long as any person is not liberated, I won't take liberation either. Now that's a tall order. It's forever, because new incarnations are constantly being born, and in scientific terms, it will never happen that everybody can be enlightened in the same birth. Okay? By the way, reincarnation is also quantum fact, and of course data exists. In plethora, we have a theory based on quantum idea. It's called non-local memory, makes perfect sense, again, experimentally verified with brain data. So we are in great shape experimentally and theoretically, and the remaining job is to change the society, and that ain't easy. I'm not saying it's easy, because indeed the difficulties are enormous, not only because there are people like Trump, but the point is that even people who are not Trump, even they have very huge misconceptions that we have created, namely this scientific materialism, this absolute albatross that hangs from everybody's shoulder today. We cannot think in any other way. So you guys have a special responsibility. You are learning about emptiness. What is your problem? Once you get these ideas that we begin as emptiness, and you can, if you try it, really, it's okay, hard practice, but if these guys have done it, you know, these guys, they sit in the laboratory, these guys who have meditated like this. And there is a simple brain criterion of happiness. How much of the brain is conscious? We have a lot of the brain which is unconscious. I already told you in males, you know, or everybody actually, right brain is unconscious. So as we become more and more conscious, we meditate more, the brain activity shifts towards the left brain. And these guys who meditated, you can see it before your eyes, that the brain measurement, you know, they take pictures, and the brain pictures clearly show that the activity indeed has shifted to the left brain, conscious, not in the unconscious. How did that happen? Because of this single thing, meditation with loving kindness. How much more verification do we need? And once we believe in consciousness, then believing in the archetypes, values of consciousness that will take us there can be directly verified. It is so easy to verify. You tell yourself a lie. If I tell myself that I'm Sally, not Amit, then immediately my finger gets so weak, I can do anything with it. But if I say I'm Amit, then it gets back its power immediately. See, this is called behavioral kinesiology. Simple muscle testing can verify the power of truth. So easy, right? Our body knows what is true, because the vital energies, they go away, we lose strength immediately as we tell a lie. And still, why should so many people believe in lies? Once you know the truth, right? So convince yourself. That is the big job. To find truth is not easy, but you guys are in the right place. This is the way to find truth. You start with a good beginning. Logic doesn't begin otherwise. You can be logical and you find, okay, logic gives you truth, but only if your beginning assumption is true. Scientific materialism is wrong because the basic assumption is wrong. The world is not made of these elementary particles of matter. There are other things, and those other things have to be included. Quantum physics gives us a science of consciousness because it has to be that way. There is no other way that the world can be built, which can be manifest. Because the world, all these objects, they're all possibility objects. They cannot manifest without the help of consciousness. Quantum physics has this very simple message. And quantum physics cannot apply to the material world unless you have mind, unless you have these quantum movements that we experience in our internal experiences, mind and feeling. So thinking, feeling, intuiting, all of these are essential aspects of consciousness. We have to build the world with this back, with these concepts back. We have to build the world with concepts of meaning, purpose, values. And as soon as these values come back, like truth, beauty, love, justice, wholeness, goodness, we are in. We are in. Transformation is not hard. It is hard right now because the brain has a built-in preponderance of negativity. I don't know if you know, but enormous amount of negativity is built into the midbrain, amygdala. I mentioned it before. Negative emotional brain circuit, all this stuff. And especially to watch is this one very unfortunate characteristic that we have inherited from the animal kingdom, called domination. We want to dominate others. We want to be the superior to everybody else. This is why so many people want to be dictator today. Domination. I want to dominate everybody. I want to dominate with me and nobody else. God bless me and nobody else. And from that attitude, what is in it for me in every transaction to what is in it for everybody is not easy, agreed. Because brain, of course, has to be transformed. But we have the heart. If we pay attention to the heart, then we have access to positive emotions. This is the Buddhist samatha practice. Samatha practice or emotional intelligence is an essential practice because without it, we cannot conquer the brain. We cannot tame the brain. Brain's negative emotions have to be tamed. Once you tame them, then they're okay. And taming is not that hard once you get the idea that you have another experience that we can balance the negativity with. This very positive experience of love is built into us, built into the heart. In this way, quantum sciences and spiritual traditions, I mean, look, for me, it was once I realized that it is the spiritual tradition, it was so easy because the wisdom traditions have given us so many hints, so much data that really it was not that hard anymore. Majority of scientists, they still debate about very basic things about consciousness because they just don't realize that spirituality is basic to consciousness. Without spirituality, you don't have even a definition of consciousness. If consciousness is not inclusive, it is nothing. Well, it is nothing anyway, but that's a different story. It's a very complicated nothing. It's not a simple nothing. So in this way, I mean, you really have to recognize how powerful a situation we are. We are that. You know, this is the thing. We really do create our own reality. We just don't know it. We don't have lost the power because we have lost this sense of these great archetypes. Following any of them, we can reach that ultimate consciousness, and then we can do anything because we can choose. We can choose health, we can choose prosperity, we can choose happiness, intelligence, what have you. And in that world, I invite you. It's no other world to live. Why do you want to live any other way? Thank you.
Thank you, Amit. That was wonderful. And you collapsed time. I think we've just We're in a zone there for a little bit of a flow state. You know, I was wondering if you could maybe take a contemporary example to review a little bit of some of the key themes. Maybe George Floyd is too dire or too charged, but we could maybe return to a situation like 9/11. It was one of these situations, I think, that made an indelible imprint on everybody at the time and will forever. You talked about memory. Memory is constantly coloring perception, and then perception coloring memory, that interrelated or interdependence. But also this idea that you raised with the experiment between the two meditators who are aligning or attuning, and one sees the light flashes, and that signal is being transmitted. So when a powerful incident or event like 9/11 happens, in a way, and also the principle of amygdala is there too, the impact globally of everybody experiencing despair or fear, vulnerability. If you could talk both how that's sort of review some of your principles in that scenario, but then also all those same principles in the fear response, I'm assuming they're the same principles of the love response would be possible. In other words, we could share globally with powerful incidents, catalysts, catalytic moments. I'm sure possibly like the Buddha's awakening, let's say, would have such a reverberation. But then it also assumes that most people have to be tuned in, and most people have to be prepared, and most people have to be praying or meditating. Most people have to have a contemplative practice. So, and that seems like such a huge stretch, but maybe in the quantum field of possibility, even that is, who knows? I mean, that's what we're working towards. I mean, that's what the Buddhists, all spiritual traditions are working towards. So maybe if you could just review with one practical example, both sides of the equation, so we could just get a little bit more into the practical, into the felt sense of it.
Thank you. Well, this is a beautiful example. That night, I'll never forget, my wife and I were doing a workshop in Sweden. And in this workshop, actually not Sweden, Norway. No, it was Sweden. Sorry, it was Sweden. And it was evening time. That's when the news reached us. And the students, there were about 20, 25 of them. And they all started feeling very sad. And my wife is a very connoisseur of rituals. She's a psychologist, yoga psychologist. So I looked at her, could she do something to lift this mood? And so we held hands together and we lit some candles and meditated on love with all these New Yorkers and all the rest of the Americans who are right there in the country. Imagine the shock that they are having and the fear. Will more people die? Will more attacks come? All that thought must have been going through everybody's head. And with that meditation, we lifted the students, their mood, and everybody started feeling oneness. And we made some resolutions of changing hatred, how we can contribute to that. See, it's not, if we, this is the thing, this is the thing, a little bit speculative, but really quantum way of thinking makes at least possible to think. See, many thousands of years ago, we had a society which was very different than the mental society that we have now. This is called era of the rational mind. We went through an era of humanity when we had what is called the vital mind, feeling mind. rational mind was there, but the mind was giving meaning to feelings. What happened was that men and women, they just discovered garden agriculture, and they had to work in their backyard, grow their own food, and this just has started the concept of family. And it was quite nice, you know, people living together, although they fight a lot because, of course, brain has much negative emotions, but they also connect a lot because in vital energy, you can connect so easily, feeling, heart. So they connected a lot. And in that state of connection, they learn things together. This is the thing. They learn things together. So whatever they learned, good and bad, that got codified in what Carl Jung later discovered as the collective unconscious. We cannot do that now because we have become very individual. This is not a theory. This is anthropologists more or less say this. We really were in a golden age where people are very connected. If you have ever visited a genuine Native American place, genuine one, there are many fake ones, but a genuine one, you'll find that same kind of connection between people, okay? I grew up in India, so I have been familiar with villages and same kind of connection, you know. People can have different classes. India is full of caste system, as you know, and at that time, especially lots of caste system. But still, that connection was a different connection. Everybody was connected in a village. And that connection is non-locality, of course. See, we assume that we say we, but we think it's a we of islands. It's a we of local interactions. But it does not have to be. It can be very non-local. So as we get into the study of emptiness, as we meditate on emptiness, one of the things we learn is to activate our heart. And when we do that, we are not in the brain anymore. It is easier to connect non-locally to another. And in that state, if you and I and Miles and everybody here, you know, there's some 30 or so people here, we start a Sangha. That's the Buddhist word for community, right? And that Sangha practices positive emotions, like we did that day in Sweden. This is the idea of quantum activism. I'm just repeating it in another form in answering these questions. And so this is the way to fight the demon that creates terrorism, that creates 9/11, that creates so much of massacre today, even going on and on and on. Positive emotion in the brain can make circuits. And if those circuits could be part of our collective unconscious, then we would be born in a balanced way and brain will no longer be a problem. Right now with this brain, we cannot help it. The reason, you know, it was such a shock. I came back from Sweden and what do I see? I lived in, at that time, in Springfield in Oregon. And Springfield is a sister city to Eugene. Eugene is the liberal part and Springfield is the part where the rednecks live. I knew that, but you know, for me, it's all people lovable, so it's fine. But I came back and it was not so fine because people would be going by in a car and they would say things. And my wife especially sometimes would just burst into tears that Americans behaving with us like this. She just could not believe it, but people did because they look at us and our color is brown and they would see immediately this could be Muslims and their hate was very clear. So there was also that it does not have to be that way. I never feel that way to anyone. And so, you know, if you were with me, and this is the thing that is very hopeful. We have about 15% of world's population right now doing yoga, doing meditation, engaging in, maybe not in emptiness, but something pretty close, at least, you know, love. And so it's possible to change our brain and make positive emotional brain circuits, make that part of the collective unconscious, and then all people will be born with this not only negative emotional brain circuits, but with also positive emotional brain circuit. Neuroscientists, I am glad that you invited a neuroscientist to talk to you. You know, these guys have done so much wonderful work. That is this amygdala, right? Center of negative emotion. In the brain, there is also a center which, if you build positive emotion, it balances this negative emotional part. It's like a seesaw battle that goes on, you know. This is the part, the neocortex, where we have ordinarily only rational thinking, and rational thinking, of course, is defeated every time with negative emotion, cannot stand. But if you back up rational thinking with some positive emotions, immediately you see that, no, this part is winning. It does not have to be anymore like before. Now, seesaw battle is on this side, the neocortex's side. Amygdala loses. So if we could create all human beings born with brain like that, 15%, you are already part of it. Work with each other. So this idea of Buddhism, you know, all religions have it, but Buddhism has it much more explicit than any other. Sangham saranam gacchami. You got to have Sangha. You got to have together. This is the idea, non-local, non-locality. If you create a brain circuit non-locally, then everybody eventually gets the benefit of it. That's the idea. And we have now the mechanism. I have written a book, not published yet, but we know the mechanism. Sometimes people call the 100 monkey syndrome. Rupert Sheldrake also supports it. He has a different theory of it, but quantum theory is experimentally verified, much more reliable. So anyway, we have the scientific backup if you want to do it. I'm sure that that would be one way of dealing with things like this now, 9/11.
And just to follow up, I assume that the language of quantum physics makes it more approachable when we have separation between church and state, for example, and education systems don't allow for the theistic or spiritual language to enter in. But now I assume one of the hopes in your career was to see that much more wider accessibility to these concepts could be made by the land bridge of science. But then I also wonder if you, from your point of view, do you also feel a tremendous resistance from the materialistic science aspect, that even now there's so much conclusive evidence, but there's still a kind of what I would call scientism or scientific dogmatism to fight against in order to really make it as it seems like all the evidence is there, but there's a tremendous resistance from the old guard, and so what's your experience with working with the thick-headed?
My present conclusion actually is more towards, you know, this latter point of view that I gave, that we should work with the 15% first because they're ready. You know, in the Bible, if you look at Jesus' teaching, you know, he had the same problem because majority of people were not very spiritual. So he started as a rebel with Judaism because Judaism has already gone very materialistic. So, and Jesus, every sermon he gives, it ends with, those who can hear, let them hear. So this is very important because some people just cannot hear. Like I told you, the non-retired scientists, they're so scared, you know, and it is real fear. I have gone through that. I became a quantum physicist. That discovery came in 1985, after which I just did not engage with foolish questions of how many angels can dance on a pin kind of physics anymore. I started doing meaningful questions, although they are outside of physics. And so I had constant skirmishes with my department. So I know how hard it is, but at the same time, our forefathers in America were so smart. Like in academia, there is tenure system, so nobody could fire me, and I took advantage of that. I had to do some financial sacrifice, and that was it. but my job was secure and I did whatever I wanted to. I was clear on my conscience because I was publishing, I was doing research, but of course they're not acknowledged. That's fine. So if the 15% are able to do that, if 15% become together, non-local, connected, then as I said, we can change humanity, and after 6-7 generations, those negative emotional circuits lose their grip on it. The basic problem is that domination circuit. That domination circuit prevents us from seeing that everyone is equal, or at least has equal potential. And we are connected, and therefore we should try to potentially, we are connected, we can actively be connected, and then we can realize oneness, and therefore we should extend our help to somebody. These are very easy ideas, and that time has come because we are realizing that we live in a finite planet. We are in this together. Many people are recognizing danger of global warming today. You don't have to twist so much arm. Only the diehard, and they're still okay. Trump had 38% support. I'm not ignoring it. That's a huge number too. But 15% is not so small either. If you have 15% of stock in a company, they will immediately recognize you and give you a position on the board. So it is a good number to have. And if we can be non-local, work together, and with internet, it's so easy, right? You do feel a little bit correlated with me, right? In this, everyone has a little bit of expansion of consciousness, I hope. And this can become only more. And there's no limit to this. Ultimately, we reach a state of no boundary with each other, and that's pretty close to that emptiness. Okay.
All right. If anyone has any questions, we can dive right in. I'm going to just ask one more as you formulate your question. And if you want to put it in the chat box, or you can just you can direct it straightly verbally with Dr. Goswami. But I have one little further little question. It'll be my last. I'm sorry, but it caught my eye. Was sort of not central to your talk, but it seemed fascinating. Maybe you could spend a few minutes just revealing what you learned. But the idea that quantum physics has a theory of reincarnation was just too good for me to pass up.
I'm delighted that you asked me this. Reincarnation is a very important phenomenon, because one of the things that you notice as soon as you start working with these values, like loving kindness is a value, they realize that how long it takes to really be loving. I mean, I'll tell you my own example. I married my second wife in 1974. And she said, well, she gave me a challenge that you learn to love, and then only we talk about love. Otherwise, what is all this I love you, and that's just coming from head doesn't do any good. So my challenge was to love. And I couldn't then. But in 7 years, she saw some improvement. So she was madly in love with me. And then I was also madly in love with her. And then when this consciousness is one came to me, then I could love. By that time, I also have picked up the heart chakra, how to open the heart, etc. So that helped a lot also. And then, one thing led to another. I met Dalai Lama. That was very helpful because he was a man was completely open in heart, and that was such a pleasure to see. So, there are the point that one has to see is that really reincarnation is necessary. It takes a lot of time. I had so much help, and if I did not have some good characteristic or karma that I brought from my past lives, I probably could not have done so quickly. Because even for me, I mean, it took me more than 20 years, more like 30 years. And for people, it takes more than one incarnation, maybe 2 or 3, to recognize love. Something of any of these archetypes. So reincarnation is a must. How does it happen? When we learn to do something, it's a habit pattern, right? We call it a habit. And our basic assumption is just like any memory, habit pattern, the memory of the habit, that ability of doing something, that also will be in the brain. But you know, in 1950s, a neuroscientist named Carl Ashley, he did some experiments with rats. Very cruel experiments. Please look the other way if you are feeling sad for the rats. But what he did was really very inhuman. He took the rat's brain, severed it, part of it, thinking that, okay, if I severed 5% and different 5% from different rats, then some of the rats will start losing their memory of the learned thing. So he taught the rats something to find a cheese, a Y maze. You go this side, you get electric shock. You go this side, you get cheese. So rats very quickly learn to get the cheese. And then he started taking off 5% of the rat's brain, 10%, 30%, even 50%. And then the rat really cannot see anymore, only can crawl to the food, but they still found the food every time, every rat. No rat lost their memory. So what's the conclusion? Lastly, of course, was a thinker in his own way. So his thought was that, well, memory could be everywhere in the brain. And of course, I was not bound by it. Already I have discovered the concept of non-locality. So I said immediately when I looked at the data, so this memory is not in the brain at all. They're outside of the brain. And then I looked at the literature, you know, the idea of reincarnation comes as old as Vedanta, which is like 7,000 years old. And they have the concept of Akashic memory. Akasha is a Sanskrit word which means space. Akasha means outside of space. Imagine that. So they did have the concept of non-locality even then. I mean, they intuited it, of course, that it had been a measured way like we have. We know the measurement criteria now, non-locality is signal-less communication. They did not know that. But they somehow intuited that memory that is outside of space and time can transmigrate from one incarnation to another. And then another human being could be correlated with us, who will inherit all this habit patterns from me. So therefore I can work gradually. I can learn to love a little bit this life, and then next life I'll take my whatever I learned with me, and so I can learn gradually. This concept enables us to transform. So there is hope for everyone. Once we are in the path, we succeed.
Thank you. And we have two questions here. One from Annette wants to know what the relationship is between I guess, Jung's collective unconscious and non-locality. And the second question was a more personal question for you. What is your personal meditation practice look like?
The first question first. Okay. Now, yeah, it is non-local. Freudian concept is entirely local concept of personal unconscious, but as soon as Jung used the word collective, he knew completely that this is a very different kind of concept. Did he know about non-locality? Yes, he did, because he wrote a book called, what is this, Synchronicity, is it the name? May not be the name. He wrote a book with a physicist named Wolfgang Pauli, very great physicist, quantum physicist. And they did have the concept of non-locality and the concept of synchronicity, which is a very non-local phenomenon, coincidences, one physical, one mental, a thought simultaneously with something that is outside of the thought, outside of the brain, outside of your completely separate immaterial incident. And this meaningful coincidence gives us great sense of meaning, great sense of happiness, because you find meaning. Sometimes great ideas come that way. So he was very aware that non-locality exists, and this consciousness that he's proposing is indeed non-local. And the proof of it is also very simple. He said that non-local symbols will come into it, like people say angels, which are representations of the archetypes. He himself got connected with Pauli because Pauli saw, you know, this Kung Yan goddess, right? Goddess of compassion, Chinese. Pauli, a German white guy, he's dreaming this Kung Yan Chinese woman. And he came to Jung, what is this? I am not supposed to see, I mean, this woman is coming in my dreams so often. What is going on? That's how Pauli got to know Jung, and Jung got to learn non-locality, and they wrote a book together. And Jung came very close to discovering the way quantum physics eventually discovered consciousness. It's great scientist. Yes, to answer your question is yes, collective unconscious is non-local unconscious also, but it's still memory. It's collective memory, this Akashic memory, instead of, but they are not the complete quantum unconscious, which is totally non-local, potentially non-local, and those are the forever new archetypes: love, beauty, truth, justice, those kinds of things, new meaning, all the creative potentiality exists in that part. That is the part that we engage with when we explore creatively. That's the objective of creativity. Okay, second question, what is my personal, well, you know, initially it was just that awareness meditation, going into subject meditation and ending up in relaxation. Eventually it just become like a sort of Zen practice, just sitting. So these days it's mostly just sitting for me. I mean, I don't really do any formal practice. I start the morning, always remember to feel inspired. That I do very rigorously, never forget to inspire myself in the morning. And with that kind of morning, what happens is that the day, as the day proceeds, you know, mind literally would constantly start shrinking, like when I read the news and again, another atrocity. This morning, you know, the first thing I read is Portland is going through this, policemen coming into innocent people and arresting them for nothing. Okay, very depressing, right? That's why inspiration is so important. And I sang an inspired song to myself and I felt better. So meditation is not something to be separate from life anymore. Once you get the gist of it, and then you just meditate, whole life becomes meditation. It's a statement, it sounds very idealistic, but it's just a way of doing. If you do everything in a relaxed way, realize that that meditation is already there, right? Because the in between action, what happens in the brain-wise, much easier to understand what is going on. Brain fluctuates between the task-related area, like I'm speaking now, so there is task-related area, and those areas will be involved. Much of the prefrontal cortex and the sensory cortex, of course. But then look, I always speak so slowly, right? I cannot speak fast anymore. And when you do that, in between thoughts, there's a gap. Where do I go in that gap? Because I'm so relaxed and heart is open, therefore in that gap, invariably, I'm meditating. So in that way, I call it a, you know, Frank Sinatra had that beautiful song, do-be-do-be-do, I call it do-be-do-be-do practice. So life becomes a do-be-do-be-do practice. And when life becomes that way, that's the Soto Zen practice. Just sit. Life is just sitting quietly, doing nothing. The grass grows, spring comes, the grass grows by itself. That's the way to live. What is the hurry? And yet everything is very important at once. I don't know if I answered your question.
Sometimes it's good not to answer it just so pinpointedly, but there's we're going to do one more question. Thanks everybody for bringing them into the chat box here. It looks like Isabel is asking a question. Can you speak about the noosphere and its relationship to meditation and healing? Maybe you can define what the noosphere is, and then we'll wrap it up on that note.
Okay, noosphere was a concept that was generated by the great Teilhard de Chardin. Teilhard was a very unusual human being who was a Jesuit monk, but he was not bound by the prejudices of Christianity. And he was also a scientist. So his ideas of evolution was much different than the Darwin's theory. And eventually, when I developed the theory, quantum theory of evolution, I give Teilhard a lot of credit along with Aurobindo in India, because they both had the same kind of idea. So his idea was that first there is the biota. And biota is, and he didn't have the word non-local, mind you, but the same idea, that biota is all connected because it's all vital energy, and therefore they will be all connected. So it's very non-locally connected, okay? And then he says that when we grow, when human beings start growing together, and very similar to the picture that I made, that we meditate together and transform together, and then when you only do meaningful things, when you do meaningful things, then you are connected again. And that's noosphere. So human beings have ways to go still, because now we are into trivial pursuit, information processing. Lots of people are just cell phone, nothing else, social media, and that's it. And that does not connect us. But tonight, we only talked, right? We did very little with anything that is hurtful. And yet, how did we become connected? Because we are talking about meaningful things. When you talk about emptiness, you get connected. Because it's so meaningful, it automatically takes you out of your cocoon. And so this noosphere is a sphere of thought, connected people to their mind. And at next level, we get connected with love, energies of love come in. At the next level is that heaven comes on earth. We create heaven on earth. That's the image I like the most. And these guys, both Aurobindo and Teilhard, they were completely sure. They write in such a, read The Phenomenon of Man, you probably have already. It's a beautiful, beautiful book. You know, that is the kind of picture that should enthuse all of us. Teilhard de Chardin, wonderful man.
Okay, that's a great note to end on. And I've been admiring your such a sweet face, Amit. I mean, you just radiate, you're just charming and beautiful and kind and sweet. I want to thank you personally from all of us at the CSP. And it was wonderful that you received our invitation, took the advantage to join us and meet with us, and gave us a lot to think about. But I'm left with the impression of just how beautiful you are, just sweet and beautiful. It's so I feel so honored and so happy to connect with you. So maybe we can just take 1 minute together, just breathing. I'd like to just dedicate some of our merit, not only just the communication and opportunity to sit with Amit today, but also since it's the end of the Emptiness series, if everyone could just breathe for just 2 minutes with me. All of us together, we can find that non-locality. If you want to close your eyes, you can do that, or you want to use Dr. Amit's sweet face to find that open heart in your own body. And just recognize that we are connected in so many ways, not just through the internet here, but also all of us in different places across the planet, in different so-called different time zones, and also in different bodies, and yet tapping into one vibration. And we can lower the awareness so that the awareness really comes from the heart space, open the heart, and feel the joy that is embodied in Amit's beautiful shining face there. The joy of decades of commitment to awakening minds. And sharing his passion. And being open to new discoveries, leading a frontier, a vanguard. Bringing together science and spirituality, East and West, modern and ancient. And then feel happy to have spent your Saturday contemplating these things. Out of all the infinite possibilities or all the infinite potentialities, this is the one our consciousness selected for this particular time. And so feel good, rejoice in your choices. And then now feel that even if there were just 30 of us, there's so many more also in endeavoring to awaken on this planet right now. And together we're collecting a tremendous force of energy, positive energy. So do kindly just portion that out to those that you love and those that need to awaken with you, and those that are struggling now, those that weren't included on the call. Feel that you're portioning out and sending some of the wave of that openness, positivity. In other words, just begin to include them by just thinking about them. Those that are on the protest, on the front lines, those that are in different countries feeling the challenges or the burdens of separation. Just by thinking about them, feel that they're included in the non-locality. And any of your own personal teachers, whomever they might be, those that inspire you, also include them, that they may continue to lead and guide and support. And if you have any personal prayers within this heart space, make your prayers and dedications and commitments now about how you want to live, how you want to move forward, what kind of choices you want to make, how you want to be part of a movement. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. Take good care. Dr. Amit, all the best wishes to you. I hope we can stay connected. I'll make sure that everybody has a way to connect with you and your work and your website. And to all of you, enjoy the rest of your weekend. And those of you that are in the CSP, we will see you soon for Geshe Tenzin Zopa's introduction to Tantra at the beginning of August. So all best wishes and thank you.
Thank you.